Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome from 161 to 180, is often remembered as the philosopher king. But long before the wars, the Senate, or the throne, there was a boy, learning quietly from the people who raised him. In the opening of Meditations, Book 1, Marcus does something extraordinary for an emperor. He begins not by listing his achievements, but by offering gratitude. A catalog of lessons, what he learned from his family, his tutors, and his mentors. It's a kind of intellectual genealogy, and through it, we glimpse how the greatest mind of Rome was shaped, not by conquest, but by character. Of my grandfather Verus, I have learned to be gentle and meek, and to refrain from all anger and passion. Marcus's grandfather, Marcus Annius Verus, was a Roman senator, respected for his moderation and dignity. He raised Marcus after his father's early death. The qualities of gentleness and meekness may sound un-Roman to us today, but in the Stoic and Roman moral vocabulary, these words denoted something closer to clemency and equanimity. The ability to exercise authority without cruelty, to restrain emotion, particularly anger, which Roman moralists often called ira, the most dangerous of the passions. In Stoic ethics, anger is the enemy of reason. Seneca, in his treatise De Ira, called it a form of madness, arguing that a ruler must be most vigilant against it. Marcus's opening line, therefore, isn't sentimental, it's a philosophical stance. The first lesson of leadership and of life is to govern the self before governing others. From the fame and memory of him that begot me, I have learned both shamefastness and manlike behavior. Marcus's father, also named Marcus Annius Verus, died when the future emperor was only a few years old. He is known to us primarily through inscriptions and Marcus's own reverence. The phrase "from the fame and memory" reveals that Marcus's understanding of his father was formed through reputation, not experience. Yet even an absent example left a moral imprint. Shamefastness, a modesty before wrongdoing, and manlike behavior, what the Romans called virtus, courage joined with moral integrity. This sentence reflects the Roman idea that virtue could be inherited through example, even posthumously. For Marcus, memory itself could be a teacher, a theme that recurs through Meditations. Of my mother, I have learned to be religious and bountiful, and to forbear, not only to do, but to intend any evil, to content myself with a spare diet, and to fly all such excess as is incidental to great wealth. Marcus's mother, Domitia Lucilla, belonged to one of Rome's wealthiest families. She owned brickworks and estates, yet lived with remarkable simplicity. Contemporary sources describe her as devout, charitable, and modest, traits that clearly marked her son. The word religious here, in Roman context, means pious in the sense of pietas, devotion to gods, family, and duty. Her lesson to forbear, not only to do, but to intend any evil, reflects Stoic moral rigor. Virtue begins not in outward acts, but in inward intentions. The Stoic ideal was a consistency between thought and action, a harmony of the rational soul. Her example of restraint in diet and avoidance of luxury would have contrasted sharply with the decadence of the Antonine elite. To fly all such excess was not mere asceticism, it was a philosophical choice, aligning with the Stoic conviction that pleasure must be subordinate to reason. Marcus's mother, therefore, represents the domestic counterpart to Stoic virtue, moderation, reverence, and the discipline of thought. Of my great-grandfather, both to frequent public schools and auditories, and to get me good and able teachers at home, and that I ought not to think much if upon such occasions I were at excessive charges. Marcus's great-grandfather, another Marcus Annius Verus, was the patriarch of the family and the first to hold senatorial rank. Here, Marcus acknowledges his role in shaping his education. He was sent to the auditoria, lecture halls, to study rhetoric and philosophy, and receive private instruction from some of the most renowned teachers in Rome. The phrase, not to think much if, at excessive charges, shows the family's belief that education was a sacred investment. For elite Romans, the hiring of philosophers, grammarians, and rhetoricians was both a status symbol and a moral obligation. But for Marcus, it became something deeper, a preparation for the philosophical life. He would later study under Junius Rusticus and Claudius Severus, whose Stoic influence defined his worldview. This line reveals a family tradition of valuing intellectual virtue as the highest inheritance. In these opening sentences, Marcus constructs a quiet monument to gratitude. He doesn't begin with his own virtues, but with the virtues of those who came before him. Each line honors a different Roman ideal: the clemency of his grandfather, the virtus of his father, the pietas of his mother, the disciplina of his great-grandfather. Together they form the moral architecture of an emperor who would rather be just than famous, and rather be wise than victorious. Book 1 of the Meditations is therefore not autobiography, it's apprenticeship. The opening lesson of Stoicism is not self-sufficiency, but gratitude, the recognition that virtue is cultivated through example. And in these sentences, Marcus Aurelius gives us his lineage, not of blood, but of character.